Hello, I'm Kochanski, Wilderness Living Skills and Survival Instructor. Today we're going to look at building a conveyance to take the place of a boat or a raft. Essentially it's a donut where if you have a waterproof cover, in the old days it would probably be the hide of an animal. I've seen grizzly bear hides, for example, that are stretched out, and you wouldn't believe how large a surface. So a grizzly bear hide would probably make I don't know whether you call this a raft or a coracle. I'm going to call it a form of coracle. There are so many different names for conveyances, but it would probably hold 4 people in all their gear if it was a grizzly bear hide. There's a situation where your sleeping gear in the old days would be hides, like buffalo hides. And I suppose the buffalo hide would be what you could use to make a waterproof cover. Here we are using something we could have brought. Issue sometimes is that you know ahead of time that you're going to have to cross rivers, streams, rivers, that generally the issue of wading rivers is kind of complex. To be able to make a craft that will help you get across without having to wade has its merits. So it was a common thing for us, knowing that we would have to cross a river, the McLeod specifically. We would bring the materials, which we'd find that maybe 8 mil polyethylene and then parachute fabric that would help you protect the polyethylene from puncture. And we would make this donut, as we're about to do, and then the first strongest people with poles and paddles get across. Then using a rope twice as long as the river is wide, you ferry everybody across. So it might even be that to get that rope across, there might be like 2 or 3 people who would wade across the river or swim across it or whatever. But basically we would build these, and very often we were able to pole and paddle to the opposite side and then set up that ferry system where the ropes are pulled back and forth, and you would load 2 to 4 people and their gear and tow them to the other side, and away we went. This type of activity is pretty popular. People like to make conveyances that will take you downriver. So when you got a reasonably flowing stream, there's a lot to be said that if it doesn't have too many log jams and so on, that you can save walking and whatever, and you go down the river and dismantle your waterproof skin and continue on and build it as you need it. One situation I use fairly often is that I would have a small creek or a relatively small stream to go down in the direction of flow. Well, I'd build a small enough coracle and I would load all my gear and then just tow it behind me as I followed the stream, because maybe the stream is never more than knee deep or maybe less, but you still have enough flotation not to have to carry your gear through rough country when you can use the creek. So you tend to float the thing on towing it, but every once in a while you put a lot of your weight on it and then use that to get you past some of the deeper, faster water and so on. So there's all kinds of things you can do to help you move downstream or across stream. We are using the challenge here that outside of having a waterproof hide, can you find all your resources in nature to build this craft? Well, here I have bound boughs using handfuls of grass. And you find that boughs can be harvested by breaking them off. You find that spruce branches are so brittle that it's quite easy to extract the stems, and you don't need a tool or a knife to cut these. I mean, it took me quite a few years to realize that I can harvest a branch by snapping it in the right way like that, rather than grabbing the branch and cutting it with a knife. Grabbing a branch and cutting it with a knife leaves you open to sometimes accidentally cutting your hand that's holding the branch. So using stuff like this, you can now build this donut. And using grass that you can pull up by hand, you will bind the whole thing together. The issue here is the grass is usually not long enough just to use a nice handful, which feels like a comfortable handful. By itself, thus, it's too short. So you take that comfortable handful, divide it in half, lay it beside the other so that you've got about a 1/3, and now you've extended the binding material to the extent that it will now hold and be longer to be able to do the binding. Now if I make this long enough, I could almost use it like a belt, but if you twist it like so, you now have the benefit of a longer binding material. But you have to realize that if you find that it's pulling apart, you haven't twisted it enough. And if I take it and I grab the two ends, so I have to have a sufficient handle that the two ends can be held together and twisted like so until it is so tight that when you press this in under itself, that the tightness keeps that from undoing. And that's the secret. This binding that I just demonstrated here, it's one of the most useful bindcraft ideas that I've ever encountered, because it has such a wide applicability, from lashing ridge poles to tying on thatch to tying up bundles that you're carrying, twigs and everything. So you'll find the bindcraft, knots, stuff like that is a serious bottleneck that if you don't know how to overcome it, you can't get your job done. We have laid out our so-called waterproof cover, which may be a heavy-duty polyethylene, probably 8 mil. It would be guaranteed that you would be able to use it for some time. And then we have the boughs. And we end up having to create a bundle that's long enough to go twice around. And we have laid out our cover because you have to make your donut small enough that the cover will do its job. Because if you make your donut too big, you're not going to be able to get the displacement flotation that you're looking for. So we have some boughs, and if you're going to make a double donut, there we have tied so they're ready to go there. You start and taper it. You start with virtually, so I would say that I would start with a handful. And since this is such a small diameter, the binding that I use here, just the one length without overlapping, is going to be sufficient. And I might take maybe an arm span where I go from very small to the diameter that I would like to end up with. So here, the first bind. The tighter you make it, and the harder you have to push to get it under itself, the more likely it's going to hold. Now if I'm going to continue using this, or continue with this, you might use the technique where you take a small handful. If you got long ends like this, it's better to eliminate them. And a small handful might be 3 of these. And they are put in to the center of the previous handful so that it hides the ends that might compromise, might puncture your cover. So there I have a handful, and perhaps a little more than a outspread hand. We still can probably use a single without having to overlap, tie it again. And so ad infinitum, you now proceed to make this tie that I'm just doing here probably 20 times before you're ready to start to make the oval. So I'm not worried about making the oval till I have a good length. And maybe if I am working on my knees where the access to all the materials, I can just slide my finished product off as I add it. Obviously, if my bows are long, pretty long, the construction will proceed faster. If they're short, it's no big deal. Now we're using spruce boughs here. Again, that's not really of use to us, so remove it. If we're using spruce boughs, then we have a certain length of, I see the inspector is checking us out, see if we're, so here I will still probably have just one handful. After a while the bundle gets bigger. It helps if your boughs have been gathered in an orderly fashion, unjumbled. You know, you eventually you get so good you reach over there and grab the handful without having to sort things individually. So now my handful is getting bigger, and the taper part will be there. There's a nice sizable bough. There it goes. I straightened that out, and that one popped out. So I gotta get into practice of doing it more thoroughly. So at this point, I will be probably at the diameter that I hope to so it might be that I have to use 2 handfuls before I make a binding. So there's an oval we're producing, and when a completed ring is done the first time around, then maybe we create the ring. Right now I'm not worried. I'm just everything done barehanded without the need of using a knife. There'll be the odd stick that might protrude, but when you get most of them hidden inside the bundle, I think the chances of puncture it looks like there I might have have not made a good tight. I guess where you place the bindings, that's according to trial and error. And as I proceed, I'm saying to myself, should I use such a big handful of grass, or should I? What will work? Now we have made this elongated bundle. We don't have to worry about it being too straight or anything like that. This is like a very flexible snake, you might say. It's obvious that when you bundle stuff like this, you don't want to be pulling on the bundle too much, because it'll probably disengage if you pull too much. I have left the cover in place where actually you might build this beside the cover. And once you reach a certain stage of construction, you put the bottom in, and then you flop it over onto your cover, and then attach the cover so it stays in place. Well, here we have enough of a bundle for our purposes to complete the oval we're wanting to build. And I think just going for a long construction, breaking the situation up into numerous steps. This will be sort of a one-person. I tried to calculate what one person would need. There you go, with regard to the issue of pulling too much. You disengage but no big problem. You just untie your twist and join it up again. But it won't. I know that it won't take much pull to so maybe it's a good thing this happened, because then you'll realize the issue of being careful how you pull this ring. And especially here at the end where I was trying to taper but the issue of tying this really tightly, so tightly that it's difficult. You draw it up until it's almost on the verge of impossible to be able to press that in under itself. And that pressure will help hold. When you're building a shelter, or you're building a boat, you can't build a shelter bigger than the cover. You have to cover it. When you're building this device, you've got to be sure that you have made the donut small enough that the covering material that's supposed to keep you waterproof, keep the water out, yes, not too small, not too niggardly. So this will tend to look like a small raft. Now, this donut will actually be strengthened some more the second time around. And there we have the completion of a squashed circle. And this end will now insert into the or not. Looks like jamming it. It's a little big, so I'm going to have to overlap it here like so. There's the second layer developing. And once it's there, now we're binding
You might undo some of the binding, but lots of binding probably makes it more, it'll hold together. And of course the cover will also participate in making the whole thing hold together. The donut is to give you freeboard. It's to give you some, you know, the raft is going to draw a certain amount of water. Here, we bring this in a little. And the cover. Let's see, does it come up at reasonable height? And we will continue with the second layer. Now the reason 2 layers, one above the other, will give a more compact bundle. 1 layer tends to be a pretty heavy, hug-sized configuration. Now here we're progressing with the the second layer, where we sort of pay attention to the thickness and you know, make a good job of twisting our ties here. And we're 3/4 done. Everything seems to be shaping up. The second layer, rather than jamming into the middle, because there's already a means to hide the ends. So here you see the ends. They're going to be encased. The tie, I put it in, locate it, and then put a good handful, sort of always on the watch out for some of the sticks that maybe might be pokey. So there's the fairly good handful. It lays over top, hiding the previous ends. And you'll find that you've got to look at the way twisting goes. There's 2 ways of inserting under itself. One way lets go faster, and the other way anchors better. So you don't have a choice as to do it one way. One way is better. Gotten the donut finished. Now we have to put in the floorboard. So there's 2 reasons for the bigger sticks. One is that when you step in the raft, your foot shouldn't go through your waterproof cover, and the other, these sticks should keep the raft from changing shape to a certain extent. So the issue is that the sticks usually are jammed into the close to the, this is the bottom we're looking at. We do all our work here, and then the raft will be flopped over and then the cover tied on. So you can see we've got that laid out, and here we have a variety of options. Now, from my way of doing things, I found that with the sticks we're using, that if you're using willow, you can split them in half so that you got a flatter and more flexible to split the short pieces. We got the long pieces that go the length, and one way of anchoring the ends is to actually put it into a binding like that's here on the surface, and then as we have here, it's pointing away, and when I bring it around, if the grass can take it, that tightens the bundle more. And then over here we might sometimes use extra grass, or over here we might be tucking it under the one that's in existence. And so I might do this a few places with the idea that once I'm finished with these long ones, the raft doesn't want to elongate or whatever. So I'll alternate. And here I'll do this one and do it the other way. And when I've done these, then I'll go back and tie the ends that are up in the air. So again, I calculate on how do I put this under, and then go right around, thereby tying it on in a way that it doesn't want to slip. So we've done, I think forks might in some ways hold a little better, but you have to work at the idea that when you put these sticks in, are the ends anchored enough that they keep the donut fairly stiff. So here we have a binding that's handy right there, so I can undo that and then bind it even more tightly. Trying to tighten it so that, of course, the more difficult it is to tuck under, the better it holds. And this middle one, now I guess I can. And the test of your binding will be that when you do this, do you unravel it? Well, put it on the wrong side, so put it on the correct side. Sometimes if you point the ends, you might be able to jam them into the bundle, but the consequence can be that those pointy ends will puncture your cover. So you work that. So over here, I have the option of undoing this one, including the stick. Strong fingers. And this one looks like, yeah. I might have to, in this case we'll do something different, and that will be focusing on, so it might be that Might be that I wrap around this end snugly.
Follow the stick a little bit so that there's a pretty good tension that way. And then tie it. And that way that end will not want to pull out. I think there's a lot of room for ingenuity, inventiveness. Sometimes as we twist, we then grab a handful of a bough and include it. Sometimes helps. And we might do the same on that or not.
And then come the short pieces. Now if the short pieces were split in half, they would weave up and down a lot better. And here too, I think there is some merit. So we have, it won't hurt to have one there, and there, there. And it looks like maybe that'll be more than enough. Looks like this one is a little longer. Switch it to that one. And again, we alternate. Over here it looks like
it might do good enough just to tuck it under there. And going over, under, maybe. So I think we can. Maybe set under, over, under, and the next one. Then you'll create a kind of a solid. If these things are kind of stiff, you might be stuck with the problem of not going over under but tying at intervals. And of course this one lends the
issue of using the binding to make it even tighter, more secure.
Cunning, eh? And it looks like we're going to just be happy with going over. And of course here we might have the circumstance that we don't take too big a handful.
Make it fairly long.
You're stepping on the cross pieces. You don't step between the cross pieces. But sometimes once these are in and you flopped it over, you can put more sticks on the bottom to stand on. Well here, I might want to tie that there. Yeah, simply do that. Let's go. So, keep going down. Get over here. Include that one and that one. Bring the two ends together. And tie under something back here. So we've created things that, well, there you see it's a little springy.
The other alternative is to point our ends too, where you see fit. Use a wide variety of applications. I guess that sometimes there's merit in splitting the ends and then poking them in spread apart to act as a bit of an anchor. And if this is, again, be aware that although it may make a neater, more convenient situation to point the ends to jam them into that bundle there, you also got to make sure you don't poke holes in your cover, because these boards here are on the bottom of your craft. So for example, I might spread these as much as I dare. It would be ideal. And then jam into there. And then the bind here is long enough to include there, come back here. At any rate, you do it until you're always working and saying, how do I do this so I don't have to do it over again? How do I do it so I don't get embarrassed by it all unraveling on me? If in doubt, double. The issue is that when you are not sure that something is a little questionable, because it'll be faster to double it than later trying to deal with something that's unraveled. So over here, again, we have the point away in the right way. Swing it around. Maybe go so fast. Now, of course, you could have brought enough paracord to have done all of this with paracord. If you're using the jam knot, you might find that there is a surprising how little cord you'll use because of the way you lash in such a powerful fashion with your jam knot. I like this business of inserting this and giving this additional that tightening and whatever, and that allows you to make your structure that much more solid. Once the raft is placed, then the more sticks can be put on your floor, but the sticks that you've anchored will do the main part, and the other sticks will just help you be able to not step through your floor.
turned a little short, so it means no big deal. You can add, if this is long enough, you can add, twist in more. And you can, so the very elongated bindings, you can there's no, if you have the grass, there's no end of inventive ways of using the grass.
Now over here we have a lot of ends that maybe are on the surface, and the issue there might be that if you can cover those ends with small handfuls of boughs. And you're saying over here this might bother me in the sense that these ends would scrape on the bottom of a, this here could be a problem. So, you know, to cover this like so probably helps reduce the rough scraping action that those ends on the surface might, so everywhere you feel, maybe even there you would do that. And I think at this stage the cover is laid out over there so that it's in position, and we now will try to flop the donut. Yeah, it's almost distorted. Now the user of the craft has to realize you got to step on the cross pieces and not in between. And since those are kind of few and far between, we will cut that's tough stuff. Yeah, go along here, Julian, and just tug it so we get more of it. I might have to unpeg that. Now go opposite. Go opposite there, and I'll watch it here. Okay, yeah, that'll do, I guess. Now go and get it on the end and tug it a little bit that way. Yeah, get the stretch from the. Okay, there we are. So here we polyethylene alone, in order that its main function is to keep the water out, but the parachute material being tougher, that's where we can use to really put the tension on it. And you'll see here ends that come up. You always watch for those that either they get broken off, pulled out, so that the issue of pointy ends. There's so you get a bough like that sticking out, it right away. Probably a good pair of pruning shears. And then of course your knots, when it comes to sheet bend, comes into play a great deal. And here I have some cord. The sheet bend is an exceptional knot in that it will tie to something that isn't a rope, like your parachute fabric. And so you now have to have enough. This could be your precious parachute shroud line, or whatever you pack in your kit that goes with the because in all likelihood you would carry the covering materials like we did, and we knew we were going to be crossing the river now and again, so we have the bundle that is put in reserve to build such a craft. And we would be backpacking from point A to B, and there's a big river in between, and we would use the river as an opportunity to build a floating craft. We also build bridges. If a stream is not too wide and deep, we often would build bridges to go back and forth from, especially islands. Some islands are kind of nice to camp on, but you're surrounded by water, and if you build a little bit of a bridge, then people don't have to get their feet wet when they get on the water. The parachute shroud line ripstop can be tough enough that you can also make holes to anchor your ends. But in some places you tie a loose slip knot and you get a little bit of the fabric in there, and then you don't. So where you can't puncture, you learn how to use the sheet bend. And in all likelihood, you may work from the inside. I had a piece of plywood in here. You could also put a layer of boughs in the bottom so that and then you find that there would be one of those floor sticks that you can tie to, and either that or Julian passed me the pegs there. Wherever you don't conveniently have a floor to tie to, you take your peg and you tie it off. You might also double it this way, and once you have anchored it fairly well, you drive the peg deeper, keeping in mind too deep is not desirable, but you find that at an angle kind of parallel to the ground perhaps, so as a means of anchoring. Now it might be that the people who we take a thicker rope to show you the issue of so you clearly see what I did. I thought I had there I got a thicker rope, so you're wondering what I had done exactly. The sheet bend problem is that you can't hold on to the plastic or the other stuff, so you have to use a method where you capture the other material by using a slip knot. So there, and the slip knot has to be quite open over in here, because as it's, so I'll take a finger of my glove here, and let's say the corner of the plastic goes in here. It goes into that loop, and this being open, as you draw it up, it pulls a fold out, like so. And in that case, it is now tied onto whatever it is. So you got to use this process, because you can't hold the finger and tie. You've got to capture the material that isn't the rope, and you got to draw it up so that it pulls it through the eye, and then creates that fold that grips it so well. Well, we have more or less brought this project to completion. We have the cover on where relatively thin polyethylene might provide the waterproof covering, but the green ripstop nylon takes the brunt of the process of lashing the polyethylene on, and maybe the prevention of too many punctures too soon. this size of craft probably would float 2 people in their backpacking gear. So we might say that might have the capacity for maybe 500 pounds. I'm going to sort of get in here. Those sticks on the bottom are probably not pleasant to kneel on or sit on, so you make yourself a padded bundle as you need it, maybe 2 or 3 of these if you need them. And here we go in here, stepping on the cross sticks and not in between. Put our pad down and you would have a pole and a paddle, but generally both. Maybe at some later date we may have there we have the long walking stick, but if you had a pole, and of course you either kneel or whatever, and you'd be floating downriver at the mercy of the current, but you could pole out, try to avoid eddying out where necessary, try to stay in the middle of the stream, and if you feel that you hit shallow water, then of course the pole would help you push off. Now, the ones that I've built, the freeboard here is enough that probably 500 pounds could be loaded in this craft and still float down a normal river, the normal rivers that we have in this part of the world. The materials are not costly. Kids love building anything that floats them downriver. We often would build these to anchor them out where the swimming goes on. The kids would crawl in on here, stand on the edge, and dive off of it to get the diving not easily done in the middle of the lake unless you've got something to stand on.